Every year, Palm Sunday, Good Friday, we read the Passion. We lay out in extended form this central moment in history. But it always ends at the lowest point in human history. The worst of all of the offenses against God that we who are humankind have committed. The rejection of the love of God expressed through the life and ministry of Jesus. We who have sinned, we are part of this low point. We are called upon to reflect year after year on this reality. Our growth depends on coming to the awareness of the seriousness of this moment, so that we can turn our hearts more fully to what God desires for us, that God can lift us from this low point in human history. The reading of the Passion, it always provides for us multiple examples of the worst of our behavior. It lays out for us in the various characters that surround Jesus in this reading of what happens when we are overcome by the weakness of human existence. We are confused. At times in our lives, the weight of burdens in our life grows so strong that anxiety overtakes us. We are uncertain about what steps to take. And in those moments of stress, all too often, the worst of us is what comes out. And this is what is on full display in the reading of the Passion. We have this central character of Judas, this man who had been so overcome by disappointment in what he expected from Jesus that he was willing to betray him. And in that act of betrayal, he became so consumed and overwhelmed by his own confusion that he tried to undo it by throwing the money back into the temple, and later to take his own life at the height of his confusion. We have Peter, who thinks that he is strong and ready to respond to the demands of being a follower of Jesus. I am ready to lay down my life for you, only to be overwhelmed when the threat actually comes. And in the confusion of his mind, he betrays, he denies, and he repeats his failure. We see it in the crowds of people that gather around, the ones who we give voice to when we read the Passion, crying out for the death of Jesus. Who do you think you are? If you are so great, come down from that cross. And the mob mentality takes over as we lose all sight of justice and dignity, crying out to pile on to the weak, the one who has been singled out. We see it in the confusion that reigns in the interaction of Jesus with Pontius Pilate. This man who is afraid of the growing mob around him, worried that he is going to lose control, and yet confounded by the one who stands in front of him accused, and yet unwilling to speak out on his own behalf. Jesus is surrounded by the worst of humanity in that moment. Not necessarily the worst people, ordinary people like us, but people so overwhelmed by the confusion, anxiety, and frustration that they feel that too much like us, they lash out and they act on the worst of their behaviors. This is held up for our reflection, and it is all too familiar to us because each of us can identify those times where we felt the burden of our weakness and respond in ways that we later regret, maybe even causing problems that can't fully be undone. This is the mark of sin in our lives. It is a reality that we must confront, and the days of Holy Week call us to confront it. But this reading of the Passion also gives to us the absolute best of humanity, the perfect example of humanity in Jesus himself. Jesus is the central figure. As all of the confusion reigns around him, we can learn what it is to be perfect by meditating on the life, the words, the reaction of Jesus himself. My recommendation to you is that in the coming Holy Week, that you will take this reading of the Passion again and read it with a very keen eye to Jesus himself. How does Jesus react? We see Jesus as the perfect model. A model who feels the burden. He understands the weight of human weakness. It's part of the mystery of God becoming man, is that the weakness he feels is the reality of human weakness. And in the garden, he cries out to God, "Can't there be another way? I know the cross is coming. Can't we do this another way?" And in that agony in which he sweats blood, we see that that's part of the struggle. In our own struggle, we have to then stay with Jesus to the next line. But let it be done according to your will. He surrenders to the plan of God, recognizing that even as the worst seems to be taking hold, God has a plan to give life. And so Jesus, in the face of his own agony, surrenders to the will of God. That's the perfect human reaction. This is what God asks of us. Trust in the plan of the Father. We see him reacting to those who betray him with a compassion for their weakness, telling those disciples that when their faith is sifted, then they will return, offering them a path of mercy, a chance forward despite their failure. We see Jesus as the fever pitch of the crowd rises and he becomes the center of interrogation. He stands in silence, recognizing that there is no answer that can be given in the face of the accusations coming his way. And so he speaks in silence. He allows the plan of God to be carried out. Too often, when we find the weight of our burden, we look for things to say and say the wrong thing when silence is all that can be given in the face of many of our challenges. Jesus tries to push back on the crowd, and he reminds them of what it is that he has been doing. He tells them when they react in violence, put your sword back in its sheath. If you react with violence, violence will come to you in return. He accuses them. Why do you come after me with clubs and sword as if a robber? I have stood in your midst and I have healed and preached. He tries to remind them. And maybe the most important lesson that Jesus tries to give is the lesson of prayer. He warns his apostles what is coming. He invites them into the garden so that they can pray with him, and they fall asleep. Twice he goes to them and says, "Watch with me. Watch and pray that you may not undergo the test." It leaves us to wonder what would have happened to Peter if he had held vigil in prayer like Jesus. Maybe he wouldn't have given in to his weaker self and denied Jesus. If he had taken Jesus at his word, committed himself to prayer, allowed the Father to strengthen him, maybe he would have been better. And so in the coming Holy Week, we are called upon to walk with Jesus in the mysteries that give us salvation. The worst moment in human history will give way to the best moment in human history. And the presence of Jesus in the world stands as an invitation to the crowds that called out for his death and to the crowds today that repeat those words. It is an invitation Come walk with me. Listen to my voice. My sheep hear my voice and they follow me. If we can take up that invitation, then we have the example and the strength of Jesus so that we can respond better in the worst of us. In those moments when confusion and difficulty arise in us. St. Paul will eventually look back on these events, and he will remind us in very powerful words. He says, this is the mentality of people, but you are different. St. Paul says you are different because you have the mind of Christ. He also says, be transformed by the renewal of your mind. And so the prayer that I offer to you for Holy Week, to read the Passion, focus on the person of Jesus, and pray for the mind of Christ, so that as he provides grace for you, you can respond according to his life in you. And with the mind of Christ, you can face all of the challenges that come into our lives.